inspirational because, of course, the war on drugs started in the US. So to see these changes there, and Colorado calling, I think is very appropriate, Phil, is incredibly encouraging. But when you talk to people like Ethan, he'll also say that the way to fight this isn't to fight this. It really is an education process. And that's one of the things I want to share with you. So the Star Trust was actually set up when we were going through the original psychoactive substances bill, and we were negotiating and dealing and lobbying officials. And this is an industry body set up on behalf of the legal highs industry. And we were very, very proud because we set up the first ever Psychoactive Industry Training Association, or PETA, and of which the Hemp Store was one of our first members. And we put in place a code of conduct which we audited. We shared that information with the Ministry of Health, and we had a very high standard of compliance and integrity that was over and above what was required by law. And in fact, this industry body will be duplicated in the UK. We've just set up an office up there, and we're very, very proud because it's a New Zealand initiative and it's a world first. And one of the interesting things, of course, that it was passed thanks to the Psychoactive Substances Act, made all this very, very possible. But the interesting thing about it that my two fellow speakers have mentioned is that by making a few tweaks to this act here, we actually have the opportunity to put natural cannabis through this very same act. And in fact, it's 9(3)(a). Right? All we've got to do is take out anything that's scheduled, like anything that's scheduled under motor isn't allowed to be put through here for testing. I had a meeting yesterday with the ministry, and I just kind of put some pressure on them to try and find out how comfortable they were with that kind of amendment, because we know that they can do amendments, right? And they're not very comfortable. I mean, they've got this vision for a smoke-free New Zealand 2025. You know, I mean, it's like it reminds me of that UN poster. What was it? A drug-free world in 10 years. Remember that? Whoa, far out, you know. Yeah, so smoke-free New Zealand 2025. So it's going to be actually quite challenging for us to get natural cannabis through this process, and I think there's a lot of work that actually has to be done. But I do agree with Chris and Ross that we've got this legislation in place, and I think that a huge amount of work's been done to get us to this point, and I'd like to think that with a little bit more effort we can tweak this to get the result that we're all looking for. And let's not forget, of course, that the media do have a role to play. This is an actual photograph of two students after smoking some kryptonite. Yeah, look, I mean, the media, Fiona touched on this here, it's embarrassing, isn't it? I mean, journalists in this debate have got more power and influence than scientists. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, this is 2014. But what was particularly disturbing, this was in the US press, but this story was picked up by the ODT. The ODT ran with this. Synthetic cannabis turns kids into zombies. I mean, this was the high watermark of hysteria in the press. And we actually challenged the ODT. We took them to the press council on this and actually won a concession from them. But the damage was done. You know, I mean, this is sort of playing into all of the prohibitionist rhetoric that we've been having to endure for the last 50 odd years. Yeah, pretty shameful stuff. And I mean, just recently, more relevant to what's happened with the amendment that occurred last month is, you know, we had this avalanche of negative press championed by Campbell Live, culminating all these stories and oh, we've got this addiction epidemic and all the rest of it. Well, the reality was nothing really happened. We had the amendment and there wasn't an addiction epidemic. In fact, the New Zealand Poison Centre last week came out and said, well, we've had 14 people ring up, say that they've got some addiction issues. You know, 14 people. So, you know, there was more than, we know that at least 10,000 people a day were smoking synthetic cannabis. No one ever died. No one's ever died from cannabis, synthetic or natural. I mean, that's how bloody safe it is. 5,000 Kiwis died last year from tobacco. 1,000 from alcohol. None from cannabis. Yeah, so 14 people with an addiction issue. Everyone that we looked into all the cases of people that had issues with synthetic cannabis where they were at A&E. We in fact had a report done by Dr. Nola right down here. And what we found was there was always polydrug use, or always alcohol. In fact, when we looked at all the cases in the UK, alcohol was always the mitigating factor. It was the catalyst for all of the chaos that was caused. But it's legal. So yeah, I wanted to tell you a story that brings home just how complex the issues are around drug policy, because no politician, when they did this amendment to end or ban legal highs for marketplace, would have foreseen the unintended consequences. But some of you may have heard of Stardust Creations in Wanganui. So Donna's had this retail shop there for maybe 20, 30 years. She sells legal highs, legally, used to. She rang me up last week. She goes, Grant, I've just sold out of scales again. I said, what? She said, at the end of that amendment, the ban, she said, I sold 35 pairs of scales in 10 days, little digital scales, right? She used to sell 1 pair of scales a month when she was doing selling things. I said, what's going on? She said, Grant, P is back in Wanganui. I said, really? How? She said, apparently there was all these kids in Wanganui that were smoking synthetic cannabis to chill them out, to get them off the crack, right? To calm them down. Now, P's back. Worse than that, the black market that now controls the synthetic cannabis industry in New Zealand, and quite happy to do so, of course, they don't have to do quality control, ID checks or pay taxes. Her daughter, 35-year-old lady with 3 children, I don't think she'll mind me sharing this with you, had a member of an organised criminal fraternity turn up in your home, dump a whole lot of synthetic cannabis on their front lounge, said, right, you work for us, you sell this now. I mean, that's pretty scary. Came the next day, threats of violence, came the next day, we had to get National Drug Intelligence involved, had to dummy up and arrest, put them in a safe house, you know. Synthetic cannabis hasn't gone away. Synthetic cannabis is out there, there's plenty of it available. It may not be of the same quality or standard that you could have got from, say, a Cosmic or a hemp store, but it's out there and it's going to cause a lot more damage than it ever did under a regulated marketplace. So lastly, this is me not breaking the law. This is me responding to a challenge from Duncan Garner. You remember this one, Ross, after the debate last year? He challenged me to smoke, because I prefer natural cannabis. He challenged me, he said, oh, you need to smoke this. I was all right, okay. Went down there, rolled up a joint, went out the back, smoked it, then went on to his show and did the show. Look, it wasn't that bad. I would have preferred a natural option. I thought the natural option is just tastier, nicer. Yeah. Didn't make me quite as psychotic, you know what I mean? Yeah. But it's illegal, right? It's illegal. And so I'm not going to upset anyone here, but look, I think that when you've got a law as immoral and unjust as the motor is, and as outdated as it is, I mean 40 years old, for God's sake, it's almost our moral duty to break that law. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? We almost, we almost like, it's almost like, yeah, it's like, you know, we have to do that, don't we? I mean, it's our moral duty to break a law in order to fix it. Let's break it to fix it, right? So that's what I'd like to end on, and I'm looking forward to getting some Q&As. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Grant. That's General Manager of the Star Trust, Grant Hall.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Right, we'll get into some Q&A shortly, but I'd just like to mention that the report of Jeff's that was mentioned earlier was actually taken from all available data that the Ministry of Health has access to, and it's now actually on paper that we have Peter Dunn claiming the opposite of the evidence from his own department.
Surprise, surprise.
So, I just thought I'd like to point that out. Right, now before I call for questions from the audience, just briefly I'd like to ask all 3 of you to play a game of Perfect World. In a perfect world, your organisation's preferred alternative to the Misuse of Drugs Act would be?
Go up to the... Oh, sorry, yeah, I mean...
One at a time.
Look, without a doubt, for all the reasons that I've already mentioned, the PSA, the hard work's been done, you know, it's there. We can amend that act. We've seen the government do it very rapidly recently. So I think that's what we have. Let's work with what we've got. And I think that all drugs should be held to the same standard, including alcohol and tobacco. I don't think they should be a special case at all. I understand that they have some cultural history and all of that, but at the end of the day, I think we should have the same standard of safety applied to all drugs, regardless of what that drug is. That's just my personal belief.
Oh, perfect world. What would... I'd be rich.
I'd be paid to be here. No, so let's see. No, perfect world, of course. What NORML is calling for is for it to be a health issue, not a crime. We want safe legal access to medicinal cannabis, and we want a regulated, taxable, adults-only market for low-risk drugs, including cannabis. So that's been NORML's long-standing policy for some time. The PSA would seem to satisfy a couple of them. Doesn't allow for medical, so there needs to be a bit more action there. Perhaps a separate sort of approach for medical. And we need a realistic chance of it happening. You know, it needs to actually happen rather than talking about it for years and years and years. But you know, ultimately, there's a number of laws that would achieve the outcomes we want of fairness, equality, justice, freedom over your own life, protecting, you know, and reducing sort of harms for people, but without, you know, banning things necessarily. Yeah, does that sound perfect? Sounds pretty perfect. Yeah.
Nirvana.
Bearing in mind that the Drug Foundation's public health organisation, we have a bit of paternalism with what we advocate. So a hybrid of the PSA plus the Portugal model. The thing that we like about the Portugal model is that people can be referred to getting in front of a health professional if they need that help. So something like the PSA, where it's not treated as a criminal justice issue, combined with a health referral scheme so that people who need help can get it.
Okay.
That's actually really good, yeah.
Okay, we're open for questions now. Do we have some questions? Do you have the microphone out there? Great. Okay.
May I make a point more? Also, when they ask the questions, we won't have the recording properly, so if you could restate their question, then answer it.
Oh, right.
Okay. Right. Right. Do we have a question from the audience?
Okay.
Wait.
Would you support, in terms of cannabis, that legalization would take away the revenue from the gangs, and that would mean people can go near a legitimate source rather than a shady source just to buy cannabis? And also, the question of the quality of cannabis when it comes to gangs can be very questionable on what they put in as well.
Oh, great. Okay, I'll answer that. Yes, and yes. Part of what's interesting that's happened. Oh, we're going to restate the question, and that's that. Do we support what was it? A regulated market for cannabis? Oh, quality control. Yes, of course. One of the interesting things about what's happened in America is that NORML has had to reinvent itself to a certain extent. So it was a purely law reform organisation. Now that you have 22 states that allow medical cannabis and 2 with full legalisation, they actually are a 2-part organisation now. They're a campaigning organisation for the states that need it, and they're a consumer protection organisation for the states that have it. And they put a lot of effort now over there into ensuring that things are safe and that they're tested and that they're, you know, the known potency and everything's done to the highest standards. So post-legalisation, that's certainly something that we might need to look at in terms of being like a consumer organisation to, you know, to advocate on behalf of consumers for their safety and things.
Following around.
Possibly a question for Ross. Given the U-turn, the government U-turn on the PSA, how politically safe is that legislation? Is it possible, is it maybe that subsequently it's going to be repealed? What are your thoughts about that possibility?
So the questions around the short-term future of the Psychoactive Substances Act and after the U-turn, is it actually going to work? And I think that's a big unknown. If I was a conservative politician, I would be very nervous after witnessing all of the things that happened, the local community marches and all of that. I would be very nervous when health officials put the regulations over my desk to actually sign off those. So the question remains whether now they've been, you know, once bitten, twice shy. So I think that is a big issue. So I think the messaging that we're saying is that the law is on the books. The law, it's a good law. We have to make sure it works. One of the big failures of, one of the reasons the law failed, yes, the media and was a lot of it was around the this is being live streamed, was around the slowness in getting the regulations in place. And so the beauty of the law was in the flexibility afforded it from all the regulations that health officials were meant to develop. And so the pressure now needs to go on the Ministry of Health to make sure that the regs are in place, so by the time the industry's got a new product, then we've got a system that might actually work, giving the politicians a bit of comfort. But I would say that the politicians are very, very nervous and will be for a long time over that law.
Hi, I'm sure you all have an answer for this, but lately in Colorado I've noticed a lot of upset about people making a lot of money selling pot while another group of people are in prison for doing the same thing. Yeah. I'm wondering about, in your perfect world, after legalisation or decriminalisation, what do you propose Department of Corrections does to all these people who may be in prison or wearing bracelets, who are no longer criminals?
Release them.
You know, how do you, what law would you, how would you change the law to deal with these people and reintroduce them to society as a
So, personally, I mean, the Colorado approach, they are actually, I think there's a bill in their legislature to tidy up that situation, I think is my understanding, and they're talking about releasing the prisoners. I think some of them already have been.
Yes.
Restating the question is what would happen to people who are currently locked up or part of the criminal justice system, and in fact those that have convictions too. And there's possibly several 100,000 New Zealanders that have petty cannabis convictions right now. What we would be looking for is an expungement of those convictions for a start. People who are in prison right now should be released if they are like non-violent drug offenders and don't have any other reason why they're in there. Obviously if they've done an armed robbery, you know, they should stay in there. But if they're a non-violent drug offender, they should be released. We have also had floating around as an idea that if cannabis is taxed, then perhaps the tax revenues should be sort of allocated to certain areas. Now this was actually something that was very successful for both Colorado and to a lesser extent Washington, but in Colorado they set out in the legislation where the taxes would go. And the first people to benefit are schools, the police departments get some money, and a few of the other people who you might think would be opponents of cannabis law reform. Now I'm not saying they were bought off, I wouldn't say that, but they could see that they would benefit from the change, and in fact the tax revenues have exceeded expectations, so they're benefiting even more than they thought. Now, as I said, we've had an idea floating around for a while that perhaps some of the tax revenues could be allocated to helping out the victims of prohibition, and it might even be along the lines of the Truth and Reconciliation thing in South Africa, where people could come forward and say their stories about what the state did to them,